Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of PowerCore Productions and Podcastings, where in today's video we are going to be continuing What If Deku Was Batman? My Hero Academia, The Dark Knight Returns, Part 3. But as always, if you are a fan of the channel and everything else that we have to offer, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is PowerCore Productions and Podcasting that's come out now and in the future. Also, if you haven't, make sure you check out parts 2 and parts 1 of this series so you are caught up on the complete story as we go into part 3. And if you haven't, check out our other uploads from earlier in the week as you might find something that you like. Now, as we enter into today's video, we are going to be going into the battle trial arc of My Hero Academia. Izuku now gets a chance to test his skills against a few other students in the class. Note how Izuku uses his newly found knowledge to his advantage, all while being quirkless, showing why he is still someone who can potentially be dangerous. Also, learn more about how Melissa found her way to UA, and how she has inherited the will of One for All. But, for all this and more, stay tuned as we now continue. What If Deku Was Batman? My Hero Academia, The Dark Knight Returns, Part 3. As always, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. As Izuku got adjusted to his life in UA, there were many things that he had to be observant of at all times. Seeing as how Izuku was actually quirkless, it was up to him to pay more than the usual attention. This was something that he had learnt from Bruce in his 2 years of training before he had started in UA High. He had learned to always be prepared for the worst case scenario, to always make sure that you were ahead. Now of course, Izuku wasn't as rigid as Bruce was. No, he never believed in being too ahead to a rigid degree, but always having a fair use of knowledge was something that he did deem to be important. Many of the other students in class were surprised to learn that Izuku truly was quirkless, everyone being shocked except for Katsuki Bakugo. However, the real shock came when it came time for the battle trial, where All Might was going to be leading the class in combat training. As the students all went to the back to receive their suits, Izuku's case was different from the others. While everyone's uniforms were in a gray metallic silver case, Izuku's was in a sleek black with a dark red symbol on it, the symbol of the bat, as well as the lettering for Wayne Tech. Many of the other students were surprised that Izuku had Wayne Tech at his disposal. They wondered how he had been able to do this. Izuku explaining that he had gotten into UA with help from the Wayne Tech Scholarship Program, which was both true and untrue at the same time. Wayne Tech did indeed have a scholarship program. However, how Izuku got his advanced training, that was something he kept to himself. Keep in mind, in this world, the identity of the Batman was never revealed. The only thing that was revealed was that the Batman had been funded by Wayne Tech in order to legitimize his work to avoid being labeled a vigilante when he first started. It was only thanks to All Might using a specially made law that allowed for Bruce to work with his secret identity without it being revealed. In fact, you could count on your hands the number of people in the world who actually knew Bruce's true identity, and only a few in the government were even privy to such knowledge, being sworn to secrecy, paying a high penalty if it were ever to be revealed. No, that information was kept under lock and key. The only connection that Bruce and that Batman had was that apparently Bruce Wayne had helped funded the Caped Crusaders' work, and that was as far as it went. Of course, there were many heroes after the retirement of the Batman who tried to carry on the legacy of the cowl in one way or another. However, out of respect, no one truly felt as though they could live up to that legacy. Bruce even stating once that if he ever did meet someone whom he felt could handle such a responsibility, then he would give it to that person. Everyone was surprised more enough to see that Izuku had been given such an importance. If Mr. Wayne really saw something in Izuku to give him that sort of leeway, then he must be pretty special. Izuku's suit would be all black and standard. It would have a Batman mask, but that too was all covered as well, and served as a helmet of sorts. Izuku's suit was very much like the Batman Beyond suit that you are all very familiar with. However, it had a few different attachments. For one, unlike the original suit, this suit was not powered by kryptonite. There were no Kryptonians in this world. Instead, it was powered by a special element known as Acedamia. It was one especially made in a chemical that was especially dangerous. So dangerous that there were only a few people in the world who were able to get their hands on it. But just a small piece of xenothium was more than enough to power anything for a good few decades, as long as whatever equipment it was powering wasn't damaged. As such, Izuku's Batsuit came with a few standard upgrades. In this world of fighting against quirks and things of that nature, Izuku had to be on guard for anything. The first item that Izuku had was the cache. The cache was a sphere, a metal ball if you will. However, when you look closely, this metal ball was made out of nanite tech. The reason is that this metal ball had the capability of transforming into any kind of melee weapon that Izuku could think of in his mind. The nanites were given a special wavelength with Izuku's brain pattern, so that only Izuku could be capable of using it. And whenever Izuku held this metal ball, if he focused, it would turn into any kind of weapon that Izuku needed. A katana, a bow staff, nunchucks, or anything of that nature. However, the cache ball had one limit. It could not turn into a firearm or any other form of weapon. Only type of weapons that it could use were for hand-to-hand combat or melee purposes only, as Bruce had a strict rule against using such firearms. But for Izuku, that was all well enough. While he was trained to fight with many different types of handheld weapons, Izuku's personal choice of preference was either the bow staff in terms of long range and defense, or using a short-sworded katana whenever he needed to cut through a particular obstacle. The suit also had a strength enhancing factor, which could increase the user's strength by 10. At Izuku's current level, Izuku was capable of lifting up to 1,000 pounds roughly. However, as he continued to grow and he continued to get stronger, then his factor would increase more and more. After all, he was only 15 at the time. By the time he was 20, he might be able to lift 3,000 pounds while in the suit, maybe even more, depending on when the suit gets its upgrades. Unlike in the original, this suit's upgrades came from its combat experience. The more Izuku used the suit, the more data would be transferred back to Wayne Tech, where Tim Drake, who was helping with Izuku in regards to his equipment, as he did run the Wayne Tech Enterprise under Bruce's behalf, they could use that data to increase more of the suit's capabilities down the line. Essentially, Izuku's experience in the field would pay off in stronger and stronger equipment, as by the time Bruce had retired, a lot of the stuff that he had used was a bit outdated to say the least, and even more so from when he originally started. Izuku had a few other gadgets here and there, but nothing too much of note, seeing as how he had no idea how his hero style would pay off. So for now, this was what Izuku worked with. However, the other hero costume that caught everyone's attention was Melissa's, its design, so to speak. As you'll see on the screen, Melissa's suit design is actually one that some of you might be very familiar with. If you've seen the movie Sky High, a Disney Channel original movie, there were two heroes known as the Commander and Jetstream, both of them having a strong US style theme to their suits. The mother of the story, Jetstream, has her suit on the screen for you now. Because Melissa was training under All Might during the 2 years before the start of our story, she decided to make a suit that was inspired by her godfather in a way. As All Might's suit was inspired by his time in the US, and Melissa having US roots in her own right, she would use the suit as you see on the screen, the suit of the Jetstream. Although Jetstream would not be her name. While she did look up to All Might, she wanted to carve out her own legacy. As such, her hero name would be something different. Her hero name would be Lady Justice. The reason for also using a cape came as inspiration from All Might, as he used the cape during his younger years as a hero as well. While many were in awe of Izuku's hero costume, they were also in awe of Melissa's as well. They could see that in a way it definitely paid tribute to All Might with the red, white, and blue motif. They could definitely see her American roots in her suit design, and she took pride in that. Also in the fact that it did pay homage to All Might in its own way. Izuku would compliment her on her uniform, and she would do the same. Surprised that Izuku would take on such a tall order as having the hero costume for the Bat. Of course, there were many who wondered if Izuku would really go by the name of the Batman. It was supposed to be a sort of mysterious sort of thing, right? But for Izuku, in this day and age, hero identities really weren't as big of a thing as they used to be. And besides, it wasn't like Izuku was going to go plastering his face to the world all the time anyway. As far as everyone was concerned, the Bat and Izuku were two separate beings, and only those who needed to know would know. But even still, Izuku was pretty confident in himself, and that even if his identity was out, it really wouldn't change that much for him. All the same, the students would gather to the area for the battle training simulation. As All Might arrived, he would greet them and compliment them on their hero uniforms, especially for Melissa and for Izuku, as the two of them stood out greatly to him. Izuku carrying his helmet on his side as he walked over, and Melissa following close behind. If he didn't know any better, he thought he were looking back in time itself, seeing people that reminded him much of himself and of Bruce. This must have been the next generation that Bruce was talking about, and seeing how the two of them were, in a way, blazing their own paths, the two that would serve as the pillars of peace going into the future. As such, All Might would explain the training trial, that of the class of 20, they were going to be divided into teams of 2, and the battle would be a group battle of 2-on-2. 2 students would play the role of the hero, while 2 students would play the role of the villain. The job of the villains were to secure a location where a makeshift bomb would be in place. The goal was to either capture the heroes or keep them from reaching the bomb within the allotted time. And for the heroes, their job was to either capture both villains or reach the aforementioned bomb before time ran out. Of course, this was going to be at random, and this would give them a chance to test out their skills, to see what they were truly capable of. As the lots were drawn and the teams were set, much to Izuku and to Melissa's surprise, the two of them would end up being joined together as a team. And their opponents would be Tenya Ida and Kirishima Ijiro. For both Izuku and Melissa, they would play the role of the hero, while for Kirishima and Tenya, they would be playing the role of the villains. After they went to the makeshift battle area, where they would be using one of the abandoned buildings for the test, they would wait for the start from All Might. As Izuku and Melissa stood together, she asked what Izuku planned to do, or rather, what exactly he was thinking in terms of strategy. Izuku, first and foremost, wanted to go over their strengths and abilities, to see what they were capable of for the most part. Melissa agreed and they went to the side to talk. She explained that her power was kind of super strength that she couldn't control all that well. If she had to put it in terms of percentage on a scale of 1 to 100, she was at a good 5 to 10% max. The way she figured, she used her power to increase the strength in her muscles and in her overall body in different parts, as Izuku would have saw during the entrance exam when she rushed to try to help him while he was saving Uraraka from the incoming zero-pointer robot. She had managed to use all of that power into her right arm when she punched it in the face. As a result, Izuku saw how the arm was mangled and looked gnarly. So Izuku got a good idea of what her power was. She could increase her strength, but her body wasn't all that durable. Or at the very least, her body hadn't caught up to a point where she could handle all that power at once. Melissa explained that for a while she had mainly been trying to build up her body's strength, just to be able to handle the power. She could feel there was a great deal of it. Izuku was impressed that she could use even 5 to 10% of that power. 5% was easy enough, 10% was probably pushing it to the limit, but she could maintain 10% for a decent amount of time. At the very least, she was at least perceptive enough to know how her powers worked. Izuku also asked how she tended to use her power, or at least what was her fighting style or her flow. For Melissa, she chose to work on footwork and hand-eye coordination. She used her enhancing strength to focus on her speed, to be able to move and to jump around and to flip and dive with ease, usually relying on her kicks and her strikes, as seen in the platform-heeled boots that she wore with a point, being able to strike with a strong ferocity. When trying to decide what sort of martial art that she would want to learn, or at least what kind that she thought would be useful for her, she chose a combination of two primary martial arts. The first being Taekwondo, a martial art that relied mainly on kicking as its main form of fighting style, in combination with good old-fashioned American boxing. Even though her father didn't have much in terms of a quirk himself, he did keep himself fit in his younger years by sparring and boxing from time to time. And Izuku also noted that All Might was pretty good at boxing and at wrestling in his own right as well. So he was able to see that Melissa was a hybrid fighter with a power quirk. Although rather than focusing on just using her raw power, she focused more on being flexible, on being nimble and quick, using quick strikes to take out her opponents as quickly as possible. She wasn't the type to try to flaunt her power or get into a slugfest, which was impressive for the most part. Izuku explained that he had many martial arts under his belt, although honestly he also had only been a practitioner for about 2 years now worth of time. He wasn't an expert in any regard. If Izuku had to describe himself, he was ultimately a jack of all trades. When it had come to his training with Bruce, as Bruce was a lot older and couldn't spar, that was where Kelly would come in. As she was the last of Bruce's students, she was the one that would see over Izuku in terms of his hand-to-hand combat training. From what they gathered, Izuku was able to pick up on different fighting styles rather fast, but he also struggled with trying to focus on one discipline for a long amount of time. Sure, Izuku could have spent the last 2 years learning only one martial arts, but for Izuku, he wanted to have a nice balance, an arsenal of what he could focus on what he could and what he couldn't do. In the end, Izuku had what he called hybrid style, a way that allowed him to switch from different fighting style to different fighting style depending on the circumstance. You could never call him a master of anything, but he was more like a Swiss Army knife, something that was capable of handling anything in case of an emergency. Maybe in the future he'd focus on one style, but for now this was the best for him. Now they had to come up with a strategy, how they were going to take out their opponents and get a hold of the bomb within a certain allotted time. Izuku had taken note during the time of their quirk apprehension test how both Ida and Kirishima functioned. Kirishima's quirk was hardening, in which he hardened his very skin like rock itself, becoming something that was unbreakable in a way. As for Ida, he relied almost solely on his legs, as his quirk was engine. The engine exhaust coming out of the calves of his legs, serving as a way to give him a boost. However, what Izuku had picked up on was the fact that Ida had a hard time changing direction easily. Whenever he wanted to, there would be a point where he would have to stop, slow down, turn in the direction he needed to go, and then book it. This was where Quirk Psychology 101 came into play. Bruce explained to Izuku that in his time fighting against criminals, he had fought against a variety of people who had a speed-based quirk. Now on the outside, you tend to think that someone with a super speed kind of quirk is dangerous to fight, especially when you don't have it. But all speedsters have tendencies. You can tell who's a pro and who's an amateur simply based on seeing them run one time. Do they run in only one line, only to stop and slow down whenever they have to change directions? Or can they change with ease? Are they able to run up walls, or do they stick to working on the ground itself? And when they go up the wall, do they tend to move slower, or do they have to put more effort just to be able to maintain momentum? You see, these very things can mean the very difference between victory and defeat. Now sure, if they're moving fast enough, you might not be able to catch it on the first few tries. But thankfully, you're able to slow them down, just enough to see what you're working with and what you're up against. Ultimately, a speedster only has speed on their side. A speedster isn't particularly all that strong. Not saying that they're weak, but it's just that speed and strength isn't a combination that they share. Sure, they have the power to outrun you to a great degree, but if you can take the hits that they can dish out, in the end, it's just a matter of tripping them up one good time. And once you get them off their feet, then you have the advantage. If Izuku had planned it out, then he knew exactly what they were going to do. Ida, in all likelihood, would focus on keeping them away from the bomb. If he had to imagine, someone like Ida, who was always precise, and someone who seemed to stick to a rigid schedule, he came off as the kind of person who wanted to make sure everything would be in his favor. In all likelihood, Ida was going to be the kind of guy that would play keep away with the bomb, just moving fast enough to keep it from out of their reach. And as for Kirishima, he would be playing on the defense, looking to hold them back. If they had thought this through, then in all likelihood, they expected for Melissa to fight against Kirishima, and for Izuku to face off against Ida. Because Izuku, being the quirkless one, even with his gadgets, they still think that their quirk would give them the edge. And that's why Izuku was going to turn the tables on them. Once All Might gave them permission to start, Izuku would back away from the building. Tapping the side of his mask and helmet, he would activate detective mode. Using detective mode, he was able to see inside of the building at least to a decent extent. He was able to see where the bomb was and where they were located, exactly as he thought. Midway through to the upway point, Kirishima was going to be playing on the defense. In all likelihood, he was psyching himself up for a fight against Melissa, as he had already used his hardening quirk and his fists were already balled. What do you see, Izuku? Exactly what I expected. Kirishima's getting ready for a fight with you. I see. So, what are we gonna do then? I think at 10% I should be... No need. You should focus on trying to capture Ida. I'll assist you in a bit after I deal with Kirishima. Wait, but if Kirishima's expecting to fight me, then doesn't that mean he's pretty confident that he can beat you? He's pretty confident. And I won't lie, maybe without the suit it'd be a lot more harder. But I have a plan for Kirishima. You have a plan? Yeah. I'm gonna boost you up to the window. When I do, I'm going to make a beeline towards Kirishima and you act like you're doing the same. At the last moment, flip over the two of us and keep moving upstairs to deal with Ida. I believe you should be good enough to tag him, but if not, I'll come and assist you. As for Kirishima, leave him to me. Melissa would nod as Izuku grabbed her by the waist, a bright blush appearing as Izuku used the rocket boost in his feet, flying them up to the window as they went barreling through. Kirishima standing at the ready, preparing for a slug fight against Melissa. He had seen some of what she was capable of doing, and he knew that she was the powerhouse of the two. As such, he was gearing up for a fist-to-fist with her. Hey, just want to know, I'm not always too keen on fighting girls, but I do have respect for you, and as a man, I have to keep that utmost respect and give this my all. I see, Izuku would say. You definitely are someone of honor. But even still, if you think you can take her, then be my guest. The two of them went running towards Kirishima. Kirishima expecting for Izuku to flip over and make his way to Ida, just as Ida was hoping. Even if Izuku was clever, and even if he had a few tricks up his sleeve, in the end, Ida had made sure that he would have the advantage. However, to Kirishima's surprise, Melissa would be the one to flip over, her cape bellowing as it blocked his face, and just as it came up, he was surprised to see a fist connecting with him, knocking him to the ground. Ugh! Damn! You sure do pack a punch for someone that's quirkless. You can thank the suit. It enhances my strength by 10. Although even still, I imagine you probably still have the edge on me. Oh, I see. I would be upset, but you are quirkless after all. This is probably only fair. But you still think I have the advantage, huh? You do, although it won't matter. In the end, I'll be the one to win this encounter. Really? Well, now I gotta prove you wrong. Let's do this, Izuku! Right. The two of them engaged in basically what Kirishima had been expecting. A fisticuffs. It broke down to using good old-fashioned handwork. And just as Izuku had stated, Kirishima had the advantage, as Izuku could feel his head ringing from the few punches that connected to him. Even still, Kirishima didn't let up his guard, and he had to take some of what Izuku had to offer. But Izuku wasn't just fighting to see who could outlast the longest. He had to see something. He went for a strike towards Kirishima's forearms. They were dense, just as he thought. Then Izuku sidestepped and went for a shot towards his left shoulder. A bit weaker, but still, it was all pretty solid. Izuku took a couple of punches himself before countering with a left hook towards his chest. dense again, just as he thought. Kirishima countered with a few more strikes of his own, before Izuku went a bit lower, going towards his center gut and going towards the abdomen. Even though Kirishima was hardened, his eye twitched for just a moment. Oh, I see. Izuku ducked another punch before landing 2 more body shots, Kirishima staggering for just a moment, before eventually re-engaging himself as Izuku had to tank a couple of more hits, and even feeling some cracks in his suit. Kirishima was definitely wearing him down, but Izuku was starting to get a good gauge of where his head was at. Izuku took a right hook straight for Kirishima's right temple of his head, and just as he thought, it was hard as a rock. However, his left fist ended up connecting with Kirishima's jaw. It was a bit hard, but even still, he could feel that there was definitely some pain being delivered. He then went for an uppercut, and that was where he knew. Kirishima hardened his body, but there were some parts that were still weak. He wasn't absolutely solid. For Kirishima, in order for him to try to get the victory, he had to harden specific places of his body where he knew he'd take the most damage. His fist and his forearms, his shoulder blades, his chest, and the top of his head. Areas that would probably be susceptible to the most damage. However, his lower abdomen, his lower body, his forearms, up to the point of where the midway was between the elbow and between the shoulder, as well as under his chin and towards the neck area. Those places weren't as hard. Once Izuku got a good idea, Kirishima would go in for another strike, only for Izuku to push his arm out of the way. Now that it had been lifted into the air, Izuku knew it was time to strike. He started with 4 punches to the abdomen, causing Kirishima to stagger back, lifting his head just enough as Izuku hit him with an uppercut. Kirishima was now flying off the ground, but Izuku wasn't done yet. Taking some lined wire and a batarang, he wrapped it around his foot before slamming him into the ground once more, causing him to fall through to the floor below. As Izuku went landing above, he delivered a kick directly to his lower gut once again, causing Kirishima to cough up. Kirishima staggered back onto his feet as he went for another volley of punches. He was definitely skilled in boxing, Izuku would give him that, but in the end, his power was being the ultimate defense. In all likelihood, Kirishima would grow up to be the kind of hero that would try to stall someone out, that would tank a lot of bullets or whatever was thrown his way before counter-striking. And while he was hard in some areas, he was still susceptible in others. Izuku continued to work on the body, hitting him with some good kidney punches, as well as some rabbit punches as well. Izuku's main focus was trying to break down Kirishima bit by bit, making sure to avoid some of the more costly attacks and strike him where it hurt most. Kirishima kept trying to aim for the head, to try to keep going for the knockout, but Izuku, he tried to hit him with a style that was a bit more American. He had watched some old boxing tapes from long ago, and there was a famed fighter in the US who was known for a trick known as the rope-a-dope. Izuku would back away as Kirishima would continue to throw punches as he ducked and dodged every attempt, Kirishima thinking that he had finally gotten Izuku on the edge, only for Izuku to dodge out of the way as Kirishima punched a column of the wall, before Izuku would come right back with a few more strikes of his own, continuing to land the body blows. Before long, Kirishima would try to go in for what he believed was going to be the fatal hit. However, Izuku would sidestep him once more, delivering a knee strike to the gut before delivering an elbow blow to the back of his head, where he knew he might be a little susceptible, and he was. As Kirishima coughed up and spit, Izuku would bring him back up once again, lifting him before taking his palm and slamming him back into the ground. Kirishima tried to go in for one final move, locking him into a triangle choke. He would start to harden his body as hard as he could, locking him in place and hoping that he could hold him until he passed out. And it might have worked if Izuku hadn't had the will to power out of it. Lifting him up once again, Izuku took his free arm and took a batarang. He dropped it onto the ground below them with a detonator. Once he had done so, he lifted Kirishima as high as he could while still being choked out, before giving it one more slam, causing an explosion to take place. Kirishima was stunned by this and was forced to let go, just long enough for Izuku to deliver a few more choice shots. As Kirishima tried to clear through the smoke, his hardening quirk had dissipated. He coughed up a little bit of blood before falling over to the side. Izuku would wrap him in the capture tape, and that was one villain down. Although, even though Izuku had gotten the win, it still came at a price, as even he was coughing up a little blood himself. His head was absolutely ringing, and he knew he probably got a concussion from this. But everyone that was watching on, they were in awe. Sure, Izuku was using a rather powered suit, but in the end, it wasn't anything too overpowering. In the end of the day, he was still quirkless. And the fact that he had been able to do all of that, well, that was more than what anyone could have possibly have imagined. As Bakugo watched on, there was a small tinge of fear within him. Izuku was capable of doing that. There was no telling what he could do in the future. If he had been in that situation, without Kirishima's hardening quirk, he knows he would have lost. Even though he wouldn't admit it out loud, that angered him. Just how far had Izuku gotten? And even more so, how much farther did he have left? In the meantime, we would turn our attention to Melissa, as she was engaging with Ida almost exactly how Izuku had expected. Ida cleared out the room of all debris or anything else that could be used, and he basically played keep away with the bomb against her. Melissa using her own ability to channel the power of One for All, something she called Overflow. Overflow at 5%. She would move in a parallel pattern to Ida, trying to catch him. Small sparks of blue lightning flashed around her as they would play their ever-growing game of cat and mouse, although Ida still technically held the advantage in enough of a degree. As Izuku was making his way upward, he could hear Ida playing up the role of the villain, just as he would have expected. Even still, Melissa continued on, as she attempted to try to capture and take down Ida, but to no avail. However, at the same time, she would hear into the earpiece she had that Izuku was on his way, and that he needed her to keep chasing him, but to do it in a particular pattern. Melissa agreed, and she had to give it her all. She powered up to overflow 10%, telling Ida she was getting serious. Ida nodded and agreed that he was going to do the same, as blue flames started to form out of his engines. The time was running low. All he had to do was keep her away for one more minute, and the victory was theirs. They turned into blurs on the screen as the two of them went into their chase. Melissa was definitely faster than she was before. Ida knew he couldn't keep her off for too long, but at the same time, he knew he still had the advantage, so he had nothing to fear, right? And, judging from how she was using her power, this was probably her limit. After a few moments she stopped, she was trying to catch her breath. Of course, Ida was doing the same, but his helmet hid his fatigue well enough. And in the end, he knew that once he kept her away long enough, if he had a little strength left, maybe he could capture her. At that point, it wouldn't even matter though. The time ticked to less than 30 seconds, as they went into another fury for one more time. Blurs and streaks of white, red, and blue emanating from the room itself as they went running around over and over again, until eventually Melissa would have to stop. "You're really fast," Melissa would say. "And you aren't so bad either. I have no doubt that in due time, you may actually come to rival me." As the timer ticked into the final 10 seconds. "But it seems I have won this exchange." "Think again!" Ito looked around as he heard Izuku's voice. But where was he? Was he somewhere above? Was he hiding around? "Actually, look down." As Ito lowered his head, there would be a loud boom and a thud. "Melissa, do it now!" Melissa jumped, using the vestiges of her strength. As she leapt forward, she grabbed hold of the bomb before it fell through the hole, along with Ida, as Izuku watched and looked down upon him as he had fallen. Melissa had managed to grab hold of the bomb before it fell as well, hanging on to the side of the wall as she held it up. "It's secure! We did it!" All Might would announce through the intercoms that the hero team had won, and he was very impressed with what he had seen. As the nurses and other staff would come to see and check if any of the students were alright, Kirishima would be taken to the emergency part of UA, where he would meet with Recovery Girl. Thankfully, his injuries weren't too bad. He was just a bit battered and bruised, and Izuku, well, he wasn't too far off either. He actually did get a concussion. But thankfully, it was nothing that a little rest wouldn't solve, although Recovery Girl didn't like the fact that the students would get so violent at times. As for the other students, outside of some fatigue, they were fine for the most part, All Might commending them as they went over the match. They were able to see that both Izuku and Melissa were able to perform very well. They had made counters to the villain's countermeasures, and All Might could definitely see a lot of that influence of Bruce within Izuku, mainly being the fact that he was able to come up with a plan and execute it almost flawlessly. I mean, if this had been a real mission, even if it were touch and go for a moment, they would have succeeded. All the same, it meant that these students had a lot of promise. As for Melissa, she was able to push herself. Of course, All Might always worried about her, as anyone would for someone that they considered family. And plus, he promised her father that he would look after her, especially when she decided to take up this role. Her father had originally had other ideas to try to help All Might, but Melissa, she stood true. This was an opportunity for her, one that she couldn't pass up. If Uncle All Might really did need someone to take over as the next hero, why not her? She had more than enough capability, and besides, even though her father was American, she did have roots to Japan, with her late mother. As a result of this, Melissa felt it was her duty, and much to her father's chagrin, she took up the role of being the next user of One for All, even though she was quirkless. To see how far she had come in the last 2 years, it filled All Might with a strong sense of pride. As he looked towards the two heroes, he saw individuals who could definitely carry on of what it meant to be a hero, to go beyond, to go plus ultra. Before long, Izuku and Kirishima would rejoin everyone else who were in awe of the fight that they had. Kirishima hoping that Izuku could spar with him again, Izuku promised he wouldn't use the suit, but no, Kirishima wanted him to. Izuku asked why, and Kirishima explained, while Izuku is a hero, there are probably villains out there who will have suits like his, and he needs to know that he can overpower that, to know that he can push himself also. So whatever tricks Izuku has, whatever gadgets or gizmos, he wanted him to hit him with everything he had, because that way when he did beat him, he'd know that he had overcame the best. Izuku agreed, although he promised next time he'd try to go a lot harder, as the two fist bumped. The other students would all compete and do fairly well, Izuku and Bakugo talking amongst themselves as they watched the screen, both trying to one-up one another. However, there was one student, one in particular, who caught their attention. It had started with his battle trial. He was on the side of the hero. He walked towards the building and touched it, and instantly, the entire building froze over, and he was declared the victor. The two of them watched on as they had never seen anything like this. That was some serious power he had. The boy's name was Shoto Todoroki. And of all of the students, he was potentially the most dangerous that was yet to come. This concludes What If Deku Was Batman? My Hero Academia, The Dark Knight Returns, Part 3. As always, if you're a fan of today's video and everything else that we have to offer, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is PowerCore Productions and Podcastings that's to come out now and in the future. Stay tuned for tomorrow's video as we continue Neon Genesis Evangelion Redemption, Book 1, Part 3. What if Shinji went back in time? But anyway, that's going to do it for the end of today's video. I'm Javon Harrington with PowerCore Productions and Podcastings. Signing off, and I'll see you next time.